The 7th of November 2014 was a day that marked a turning point in my life. Before that fateful day, I was someone who enjoyed experiencing new and exciting things. But after the horrors I witnessed at the Villisca axe murder house in Villisca, Iowa, I hadn't had a good night's sleep since. To fully understand my story, I'll need to take you back to the 9th of June, 1912. One of the most horrifying days the state of Iowa has ever seen. It all began with a family called the Moores. The head of the house was a man named Josiah B. Moore, and his wife was Sarah Nee Montgomery Moore. The couple had 4 children named Mary, Herman Montgomery, Arthur Boyd, and Paul Vernon. The Moores were a very well-known and affluent family in the community, and they were liked by everyone. That Sunday, the couple's 10-year-old daughter, Catherine, invited 2 sisters over to spend the night at their home, as they were her friends. Catherine's friends were named Lena Gertrude and Ina May Stillinger. Lena was 12 and Ina was 8. After the visitors had settled in, the entire Moore family, in addition to Lena and Ina, went to the Presbyterian church that evening. The family visited the church because they were participating in a Children's Day program that Catherine's mother, Sarah, had coordinated. The Children's Day event lasted until 9:30 p.m. that night, and when it was finally over, the family and their guests walked home. They all arrived at the Moore's residence between 9:45 and 10 p.m. And that was the last time the family and their guests were seen alive. On the 10th of June, 1912, sometime around 7 a.m. that morning, a woman named Miss Mary Peckham started to get worried after she noticed that the Moore family had not come out to do their morning chores. Miss Peckham was one of the Moore's neighbors, and not seeing them out and about this early was odd. She knocked on the door to see if everything was okay, but nobody answered. She knew that eerie silence was strange, so she tried opening the door, but it was locked. With no other options, she called Josiah's brother, Mr. Ross Moore, to help her check on them. When Ross arrived, he called out to his brother, but no one answered. So he and Miss Peckham decided to get into the house with Ross's spare key. When they finally got in, they were met with a horrific sight. The disfigured bodies of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters were found in their home by Ross Moore and Miss Mary Peckham on the 10th of June, 1912. The authorities were immediately called to the scene, and an investigation revealed that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. The killer, who had been waiting in the attic for the family to fall asleep, started the massacre from the master bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore slept. The killer used an axe to repeatedly hack Josiah's face. The cuts to his face were so vicious that Josiah's eyes were missing, and his corpse was unrecognizable. The authorities also noticed a gouge mark in the ceiling of the master bedroom, from where the killer had lifted the axe to murder him. When Josiah was dead, the killer set his sights on Sarah, and he brought down the axe's blade on her head, shattering her skull with his continuous blows. As for the couple's children, he used the blunt end of the axe on their heads as he crushed their skulls. The vicious killer had bludgeoned them all to death in the same morbid manner as their parents. After that, he went downstairs to the guest bedroom and killed the Stillinger sisters. Josiah Moore was only 43 when he was killed, and his wife Sarah was 39. As for their children, Herman was 11, May Catherine was 10, Arthur was 7, and Paul was 5. The gruesome murders of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters shocked the entire town of Villisca. A manhunt was carried out to find the person responsible, but the killer was never found, and the crime still remains unsolved. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how this gruesome case has anything to do with my experience. But just like the Moores and the Stillinger sisters, I too had a horrific experience in their family home located at 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca. Just like most people in Iowa, I've known about the murders for as long as I can remember. I was born on the 13th of October, 1978, nearly 66 years after the murders. But even after all that time had passed, this gruesome case was still being talked about. The gruesome case was dubbed the Villisca Axe Murders, and it's often been called the most mysterious case in the United States. During my early teenage years, I always wondered why the Villisca axe murder case still maintained its longevity. There were many other disturbing cases in the United States that have left the minds of the masses, and I often asked myself why the Villisca axe murders case was so different. I looked into it a bit more when I grew older, and I soon realized why this particular case was so different than the rest. It's because, while some people believe the Moores are long dead, many others are convinced that the Moore family and their killer still roam the halls of their family home in Villisca. The rumors started a little while after the gruesome murders, as many people claimed to hear the screams of children coming from the house. Most of the Villisca residents wrote these rumors off as jokes. But as time passed by, people who visited the house came back telling more unexplainable and bizarre stories. A couple who visited the home said They could hear the Moore's children laughing as they ran around the home playing. 2 young women also reported capturing strange phantasms and apparitions on their cameras. The stories got even crazier over the years, and in 1994, a woman named Miss Martha Lynn bought the house and restored it to its 1912 condition. She stripped the Moore family home of electricity and plumbing, and she turned it into a tourist attraction. Since then, people from all over the world have come to the Villisca Axe Murder House to stay overnight and undergo paranormal experiences. The Villisca Axe Murder House has had a slew of visitors ranging from paranormal investigators to ghost hunters, and was eventually named one of the most haunted places in America. The house grew to new heights of popularity from there, and it seemed like everyone wanted to visit there. Well, everyone except me. Even though I grew up in Iowa, I always stayed clear of the place. As I said earlier, I was the kind of guy who enjoyed experiencing thrilling and exhilarating things. There were very few things I would say no to, as I was always down for anything. However, the only time I drew the line was whenever it was anything paranormal related. It had been like that since I was little, as I was always against exploring the supernatural or paranormal world. My grandmother was a strong believer in the paranormal, and while most people called her crazy, I always felt there was some truth to her crazy stories. I had sworn to never visit the Villisca Axe Murder House. But all that changed when my longtime friend Ron Lancaster visited me in Iowa. I'd met Ron during my years in college, and we'd been brothers since. Just like me, Ron enjoyed trying crazy new things, but he didn't have the same issues with anything supernatural or paranormal. Ron thought both the supernatural and paranormal worlds were all hocus pocus, and in a bid to convince me of the same, begged me to go with him to the Villisca Axe Murder House. I told him no, and nothing was going to change my mind. Ron was persistent, and he kept asking, but it didn't work. With no other options, Ron told me that he was traveling abroad the very next month, and that he really just wanted to go on a crazy adventure for old time's sake, as he wasn't sure when we'd see each other again. I wasn't sure if he was trying to guilt trip me into going or if he was serious. But his visit was almost over, so against my better judgment, I agreed. On the 7th of November 2014, my friend Ron and I made our way to the Villisca Axe Murder House. The tourist attraction cost $428 per night, and I felt that was far too steep. But Ron offered to pay for 2 nights. Once everything had been settled, they showed us to the rooms. I remember being really freaked out throughout the night, but Ron kept cracking jokes and trying to lighten the mood. We eventually went to bed that night, and I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. I actually had a pretty good night's sleep. The very next day, Ron couldn't stop saying, "I told you so." And even though I didn't want to admit it, he was right. I told myself that all the so-called paranormal experiences were a hoax, and I was completely over my fears. After the first night, we both spent the second day making corny ghost jokes and laughing. I was enjoying myself at the time, and I was really glad I came with Ron. But little did I know that I'd grow to regret that decision in the following minutes. Ron had gone up to his room to get his phone around 12:25 a.m., but it had been about 10 minutes, and he hadn't come back down. I wondered what was keeping him, so I went upstairs to check. When I entered the room, I saw Ron sitting on the chair with a wide grin on his face. I thought he was trying to pull a prank at first, so I told him to cut it out. But Ron didn't respond. I was about to smack him across the head when I noticed his eyes. They were filled with pure fear, and I could tell he was terrified. In an instant, the room went cold, and I couldn't move. A few seconds after that, a foul smell of rotting flesh began to fill the room, and that's when I saw it. I've always been at a loss for words whenever I tried to explain what my eyes were seeing, but it looked like some unseen figure was controlling Ron. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could tell something or someone was tugging at Ron's mouth and forcing him to smile. I also noticed Ron couldn't move by himself, and this unseen presence was playing with his body like a puppet. The scene looked like a puppet show from hell, as it seemed like Ron's limbs were being controlled by strings. I watched in horror as Ron's hand reached for the blunt scissors on the table. I could see the terror in his eyes as he struggled to make sense of what was going on, and we both tried to scream, but our lips wouldn't move. I then watched Ron take the blunt scissors and ram them into his right eye. I felt like throwing up as I watched the blood gush down from his face. I thought he was possessed at that point, because even though he was bleeding profusely, he still had a smile on his face. Ron then stabbed himself in the left eye before proceeding to repeatedly stab himself in the chest. My brain couldn't really process what was going on or why this was happening, and it was amidst all this chaos that I finally saw it. The thing I had sensed behind Ron had finally taken shape. It was a rotting corpse that stood at 7 to 8 feet tall. Its facial features had been eaten away by maggots, so it didn't look human, and its right hand was shaped like a large axe. Within seconds of its manifestation, the standing corpse disappeared, and I let out a scream before collapsing on the floor. The staff rushed to our room to see me lying on the floor, and Ron bleeding in the chair. We were both rushed to a nearby hospital, and luckily, we were able to be saved. I don't really remember what happened during the week after that experience, but according to the doctors, I kept screaming until I lost my voice for 3 days straight. It would take me 6 months and serious therapy before I was able to speak again, and even after telling my story, people found it hard to believe. Ron, who had lost both his eyes, was the only person able to corroborate my story, but he was put into an asylum as he kept muttering gibberish whenever he was asked to speak. The news took the headlines by storm as the authorities struggled to explain what had happened that day. It would take me 2 years of serious psychological care before I was able to acclimate back into society. I've also been going to therapy every single day since then, and I was ordered to move back in with my family as I still showed some trace of insanity. And I wasn't allowed to be alone. The therapy isn't really working as I can still see it every time I close my eyes. I rarely go out and I have to be watched 24/7. Even if it's been 9 years, I can never forget the valuable lesson I learned from my visit to the Villisca axe murder house. As every day I wake up, I remind myself that the dead are not to be disturbed. The story you just heard was loosely based on the real case of Robert Stephen Larson Jr. On the 7th of November 2014, 37-year-old Robert Lawson from Rhinelander, Wisconsin, was found alone in the northwest bedroom of the Villisca axe murder house with self-inflicted stab wounds in the chest. After the investigation, Montgomery County Sheriff Joe Sampson stated that Robert arrived with a group of friends for a recreational paranormal investigation at the Villisca axe murder house. A few minutes after entering the northwest bedroom, Robert called the rest of the party, who were standing outside, for help on their mobile two-way radios, Sampson told me. His companions found him stabbed in the chest from a strike that was apparently self-inflicted. They immediately called 911, and Robert was brought to a nearby hospital before being helicoptered to Crichton University Medical Center in Omaha. The police report also stated that the strange incident happened around 12:45 a.m., a time frame that mysteriously coincided with the approximate time that the brutal murders of the Moore family and the Stellinger sisters took place. Luckily, Robert Lawson was able to recover from his injuries, but he declined to speak publicly about what occurred that day. The owner of the Villisca axe murder house, Miss Martha Lynn, told the press that the incident was very upsetting and made a statement on the incident saying, "It's publicity, but it's not exactly the kind of publicity you desire to have. I don't want people thinking that when they come to the Villisca axe murder house, something's going to happen that is going to make them do something like that." Despite the strange and unexplainable incident with Mr. Robert Lawson, the Villisca axe murder house remains open for tourist visits and overnight stays to this very day. It happened on the 12th of October, 2007. Or at least, I think it did. My life since that day has been nothing but a messed up, bizarre story. No one believes me, as everyone I tell thinks I'm just crazy. But I know I'm not. I know what happened that day, and regardless of whether you believe me or not, this is my story. My name is James Smith, and as for as long as I can remember, I've never really had a home. Now, some people may see this as a bad thing, but to me it was perfect, as I truly felt like a free spirit every day I woke up. I moved around a lot while doing a few menial jobs here and there on the side to make ends meet. I didn't have much family. apart from my uncle who I used to travel with. He passed away a while ago, leaving me with his most prized possession, a little pink mirror. I don't know why, but he loved that thing to death, and I've always held on to it to remember him by. Apart from that, I really didn't own much. I just had a couple of clothes, the necessities, and my backpack. During my time on the road, I traversed the whole country, doing jobs during the day and staying at any available place at night. Most times, I'd stay at low-end hotels and motels, as they were cheap. Looking back on it now, I'm pretty sure that I stayed at over 1,000 motels while I was on the road, but there's one particular motel that I'd never forget. It had the strangest name. It was called the Tempus Mortis Motel. The day was the 12th of October, 2007, and I had just finished doing a hard day's work. I think I was pretty much on the outskirts of town, so I found it harder to find a place to stay that night. I looked around for a couple of hours, and right when I was about to give up, I saw it. It was literally in the middle of nowhere, which to me was odd for a motel. I thought it was really odd because most of the motels I had seen were built beside bus stops or in active towns. That way, they always had an influx of customers who were always looking for a bed to sleep in. So seeing this one built right in the middle of nowhere made me think twice about going in. I don't know why, but something about it felt off and my instincts told me to steer clear. So I decided to look around a little more, but after walking and searching for a couple of hours, I found nothing. It was getting pretty dark now, and I knew I only had two choices. Either I slept on the ground outside in the cold, or I stayed at the strange motel I had avoided a while back. After a quick consideration, I decided to opt for the motel, as even though it gave off a strange vibe, it was still better than sleeping outside. So I made my way back to the motel. I still felt off about it while I walked back, so I told myself that I'd leave if anything strange happened. It was about 8:30 by the time I had arrived, and I remembered walking up to the building and seeing the parking lot completely empty, as there were no cars outside. I wasn't surprised as I figured not many people would be staying here. As I got closer, I noticed the motel had a bright neon sign that read, "We offer the best timeless service." Perplexed, I wondered what that meant as every other motel usually had the normal 24-hour service sign. As I walked on, I eventually brushed off the thought as I assumed that it was just their slogan or something. I finally reached the building, and as I opened the doors to walk in, something changed. For starters, the air felt calm and serene. It was like all my troubles had gone as soon as I stepped into the building. I walked up to the reception, and the woman there greeted me with a huge smile as she looked at me and said, "Welcome to the Tempus Mortis Hotel, lost traveler. May I ask your name?" She was oddly cheerful, so I looked at her and said, "I'm James Smith, and I'd like a room for the night." She then opened up a book to write down my name before she said, "Okay, Mr. James, may I take you to your room?" Shocked, I responded with, "What? But I haven't paid yet." She then said, "Not to worry, Mr. James. We always provide our services first. You can pay when you leave." As she started getting the room keys from her desk, I started thinking to myself, because in all my years of traveling, no motel had ever offered a bed without pay. And while she did say I'd pay when I leave, something about that didn't seem true. Standing there in that reception, I realized that my gut instincts were right. Something was seriously wrong with this place. I thought about what to do next when the receptionist said something that pulled me from my thoughts. "No watches or mirrors." Confused, I said, "What?" The receptionist then repeated herself, saying, "I'm about to take you to your room, so I'm asking you if you have any watches or mirrors. They aren't allowed here." Stunned, I asked, "But that's a bit strange. May I ask why?" She then said, "It's just our motel's policy." Numerous thoughts began to run through my head as I wondered why they didn't allow those items. Normally, motels didn't care what you brought in, and when they did, it was only dangerous things like firearms or weapons. At this point, a lot of things weren't adding up. First, they offered a bed to me without paying, which was already screaming numerous alarms at me, as there was no such thing as a free bed. Then she blurted out this strange rule. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I had to leave, as I had decided that I'd rather spend the night outside. But as I opened my mouth to tell her that I didn't want the room anymore, I heard the sound of thunder and I realized that it was now drizzling outside. The sudden rain made me take back my words because, as much as I wanted to leave, I couldn't afford to sleep in the rain and get sick. So I responded with, "No, I don't have any watches or mirrors, just my clothes and the necessities." After hearing that, she smiled and said, "That's great, Mr. James. Now, if you'll kindly follow me to your room." As she showed me to my room, I heaved a sigh of relief that they didn't search me. As while I didn't have any watches, I did have a mirror. But there was no way I was going to give them that, so I decided to tell a little white lie. I then told myself it didn't matter as I was just going to spend the night and leave first thing in the morning. When we arrived at my room, I started to hear the sounds of numerous people chatting. I was shocked as I thought I was the only one there, so when the receptionist left, I decided to go check it out. I followed the noise to a lounge area, and what I saw left me speechless. About 100 people were spread out in the massive area, talking and chatting with themselves. It's really hard to describe, but they were all so diverse and differently dressed. At first, I thought there was some sort of costume party going on, as some of the men and women were sporting old Victorian-era suits and dresses from the 1800s. To the far left of the room, another group of people were wearing clothing that was from the early 2000s. But the more I took in the scene, I realized the people's clothing wasn't what shocked me. What shocked me more was that there were no cars in the parking lot, yet over 100 people were in the motel. I knew that they all couldn't have walked here, and eventually my brain couldn't take it anymore as I struggled to make sense of what was going on, but no matter how much I tried, I couldn't. I then slowly made my way to my room as I told myself that I just needed to go to bed and get the night over with so that I could leave as soon as it was morning. So I went to my room, locked the door, and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I realized that I had slept in. That was odd to me because I was usually an early bird and I hardly ever slept in. Brushing off the thought, I got up and did my morning activities before getting ready to leave. But when I was done, I didn't leave. It's hard to put into words, but it's as if my body didn't want to leave. So instead of going to the reception and checking out, I found myself making my way to the motel's lounge. They had a small bar, so I ordered a drink before sitting in one of the chairs. I drank for a little while before two arguing men started to walk up to me. Unlike some of the people there, they were dressed in modern clothing. When they finally reached me, the first man said, "Hey, you're new here, right?" So I replied with, "Yes, I am. Any problem?" The man then said, Good, good. Now will you tell this idiot here that it's the New York Jets that won the Super Bowl this year?" His other friend then retorted with, "No, you tell this madman that it's the Los Angeles Rams that won this year. Please tell him that I'm right and that it was a massive win against the Redskins." They started to argue again before I said, "Look, guys, I'm not really that into sports, but I heard that it was the Indianapolis Colts that won this year." When I was done speaking, they both had a shocked look on their faces before they busted out laughing. When they were done, the second man then said, "Hear that, Frank? He's saying that the Colts won. He's even crazier than us." And with that, they walked away laughing. Now, I wasn't really into sports, so I thought I might have been wrong. But as the day passed, I kept on having more and more strange conversations with the people at that motel. As later in the day, two people came in to sit at my table. They started talking about politics, but all they could do was argue as one of them said, "President Nixon's doing a shit job." The other person then looked shocked as he said, "Who?" "You mean President Roosevelt." I started getting tensed again, and I started to rack my brain at the confusion. I knew that the current president of the United States was George Bush, but I wasn't sure as I couldn't really remember. All my memories were now foggy, and the more I fought to remember, the harder it became to remember anything. As I sat there in deep thought, a pretty girl walked up to my table and offered me a drink. She then looked at me and said, "You look worried. What's wrong?" And I replied with, "I don't know. I'm trying to remember something that I wanted to do this morning, but I keep forgetting." The girl then looked at me with a smile and said, "Don't worry about that. If you forgot, it probably wasn't important. Now, let's drink a couple of drinks and live in the moment. So I stopped trying to remember what it was, and I agreed. We talked all through the night without a care in the world, and my mind felt free. We eventually made our way to my room, and as she walked in, the first thing she noticed was the pink mirror on my bed. She then picked it up and said, "Whoa, you know they don't allow these in here." I responded with, "Yeah, I know, but I can't remember how or why I brought it in." The girl then looked at herself in the mirror while saying, "Well, it's good that you did. It's been a while since I've seen my face in the mirror. It's such a weird rule, isn't it?" I started to say, "Yeah, I know," before I stopped speechless. I let out a gut-wrenching scream as the girl in my room turned to look at me in shock. She then started to ask me, "What happened? Why did you scream?" But when I tried to speak, I started to stutter. I was so scared that I couldn't find the words to speak or say what I had just seen. And while I couldn't say it then, looking back at it now, what horrified me to the bone was what I saw when the girl picked up the mirror. I was standing behind her, so I managed to get a glimpse of her reflection, and I knew without a doubt that when she looked into that mirror, the reflection that looked back was not the woman standing in my room. The person I saw in that mirror was much more different. She was a haggard old woman with little to no hair. Her eyes were completely white, and her skin hung off her frail skeleton. The woman's reflection truly looked like someone who was over 1,000 years old, and I knew she wasn't human because humans don't live that long. As the fear filled every inch of my body, I felt my thoughts and memories begin to come back, and the first word that ran through my mind was, "Leave." So with no hesitation, I picked up the mirror she had dropped, and I bolted. As I ran down the hallway, the motel's staff started chasing after me while screaming the words, "No mirrors! No mirrors!" The hallway's lights began to dim, and I couldn't see the door I was running to anymore. As I looked back at the motel's staff, I screamed as the people that were once human now looked like morbid creatures. It's really hard to describe, but they were all 6 feet tall creatures with pale white skin. They had slits for eyes and they bore no mouths, but even then, I could still hear them screaming the words, "No mirrors! No mirrors!" I couldn't see where I was running to now, as the hallway was completely dark, but I kept running. I eventually saw a door, and as I dashed toward it, within seconds, I was finally outside. And even though I couldn't see or hear them anymore, I kept running. I ran all the way to the nearest police station, screaming at the top of my lungs. When I arrived, I wasn't making sense to the cops, so they told me to calm down. It was hard, but I eventually did. They then gave me a report to fill, and I filled it out by writing everything that happened. I was then told to tell them the exact date the incident happened so they could write it down. So I told them saying, "It happened today, on the 13th of October, 2007. Chuckles filled the room as the cop took my statement said, 2007? Have you been drinking, sir? It's 2012. At first, I thought they were playing some kind of sick prank, so I started shouting, "Stop messing with me. I remember the date. It happened today, on 13th October, 2007. Silence filled the room as everyone was tense now. The officer then said, "Well, today is 13th of October, but the year is 2012. Frustrated now, I grabbed him by the shirt and I told him to stop messing with me. The officer then said, "Sir, I know you're under a lot of stress and a bit delusional, but you're assaulting an officer, so please take your hand off my shirt." But I didn't. I thought the cops at the station were still trying to pull a sick trick on me. A trick that wasn't funny, and with all the fear, confusion, and rage I felt, I didn't think about what I did next as I punched the cop in the face. Within minutes, I was in cuffs and I was charged with assaulting an officer. I was taken to court where I stood by my case, but everyone just looked at me like I was a crazy person. The court deemed me mentally insane as my lawyer pleaded insanity. I was then taken to a mental institution where I was locked up and told to undergo rehabilitation. It's been 10 years now since I've been put in this place. Numerous psychologists have come to fix me, but I know what happened, and I stand by it. Last month, I asked for a pen and a book so that I could write down my experience and share it with the world. So, to whoever is seeing this, I don't care if you believe me or not. Society has deemed me a madman and thrown me into an asylum without hearing what I have to say. None of you were there, so you have no right to judge me. I know what happened in that motel is true. I don't know how they did it, but they took away 5 years of my life in one night. The funny thing is, as you people ignore me and lock me up in a cage, they are still out there, waiting for unlucky travelers. And any one of you people hearing my story could be next.
Hello, my name is Villisca. I recently finished my college degree and graduated as what I always wanted to be, a librarian. When I was a child, my whole family was killed by a violent and brutal robbery at Christmas. The only reason I survived was because my parents hid me in time, and the robbers weren't very interested in finding me either. After that experience, I locked myself away in my parents' passion, books. While they were looking for families to adopt me, I was the quietest and most intelligent child at the foster care house. I read as many books as I could and whenever I could. What at first was a way to get closer to my parents also became my passion. Besides, I knew that if any family saw me reading, they would surely choose me. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't wrong, although I wish I had been. The White family was the one chosen to adopt me. They seemed nice enough, although I must admit they were very disciplined. Maybe that's why they were interested in me when they found out that I liked to read. I hear everyone complaining about how difficult adoption is, and it surely is, but for people with as much money as the Whites, it wasn't. Before I could even begin to assimilate, I had to go through the adoption process. Before it could even begin to sink in that I was going to have a new family, they were already filling out the adoption papers. It scared me how quickly they did it. But at the time, I was thankful because I was sure I would have a secure future and a family to take me in. In the beginning, Adam and Miriam were very good parents. They were demanding, yes, but at the same time, they were very patient with my adjustment to this new life. Unfortunately, this did not last that long. The problem with many couples is that not all of them are ready to be parents, and they welcomed me so quickly they didn't even give themselves adequate time to assimilate. The Whites began to get bored with me, to regret adopting me. They became increasingly impatient with me. I didn't misbehave, not at all, but I made mistakes that were unacceptable to them, like doing the dishes wrong, not taking off my slippers when I entered the house, or not understanding a math exercise at the speed they would like. What started out as demanding parents soon turned to violent and abusive parents. The punishments were inhumane, and neither of them ever had any compassion for me. Eventually, I got used to it, but once in the library, it all came to a head. That day, Miriam felt a little guilty that her husband had left me without food all night. It was nothing she hadn't done before, but for some reason, that day, she felt bad about doing it. As a way of asking for my forgiveness, the next day she took me to the library, which her sister owned. And a few minutes before the library opened, my aunt left, leaving me alone with my mother to choose the book she wanted. Everything started out well. Miriam had many recommendations and seemed in a good mood. But from one moment to the next, everything changed. I accidentally dropped several books on the floor. It was no big deal. I quickly got up to pick them up. But at that moment, I noticed that something about her had changed. Furious, she told me that I had embarrassed her in her sister's library. That I shouldn't be so careless, and that I had done it on purpose to ruin her day, and that I was ungrateful for not appreciating the good gesture of bringing me here. Apologizing, very sorry for what I had done, I grabbed the books I already had and went to choose them at the table. I couldn't decide between the books, so I opened one to look inside. That was the worst mistake I could have made. Angry at how long it was taking, my adoptive mother closed the book violently and began to squeeze it, hurting my fingers in the process. With the bookcase empty, but not letting go of the book, she started yelling at me angrily, saying I was making fun of her. In reaction to what she had done to me, I started to cry. But this made her even angrier. Miriam covered my mouth with her hands and told me to stop screaming, and that I was also doing it on purpose to make her look bad. Without finishing with me, she grabbed my hair while I tried not to cry, so as not to make a noise, to which she responded by throwing me off the table. As I stood up, still crying, she walked towards me slowly. Her eyes were red, and she was shaking with anger. I had never seen her so angry. I stood still, ready to receive my punishment, until I noticed something else. She had her car keys in her hand, and she was holding it like a weapon. The keys had a sharp tip. Did she want to stick it in me? My body froze with fear, and my only reaction was to run, no matter the punishment, no matter what might come next. Miriam started to chase me all over the library, dodging all the tables and the shelves. Little by little, she ended up cornering me. I could see her clench the key in her hand. This was the end of me. Suddenly, I saw people running toward my adopted mother. It was my aunt and a library employee. They both stopped Miriam before she could do anything to me, and as they took her away, I fell down crying. As I cried, I could only hear her saying this was my fault. My aunt did not open the library for another hour, but as the staff began to arrive, they kicked my mother. My aunt took care of me for a while, and when she found out everything that had happened to me, she reported her sister and husband and asked social services if she could take care of me. That was the last time I saw them, since my aunt also stopped talking to them. Something tells me that if my adoptive parents had wanted to, they could have kept me. But I feel that my aunt did them a big favor. Not that it hurt my feelings or anything, since she did that favor for me too.